But when I was with Bhakti Tirtha Swami for that 8 weeks on his deathbed, one day, very close to the end, he looked up at me and said, "You should write a book about your travels when you were a young man." And I said, "Never." And I told him my reasons. And he looked up at me. He was laying in his bed. I was sitting at his bedside. He said, "This is not your story. This is the story of how God took a young man on an incredible journey to find the very same thing everyone is looking for: meaning and fulfillment." Your story could reach people's hearts beyond sectarian religion because it's a human story. If this story will bring hope and inspiration to people's hearts, then it is an act of arrogance for you not to write it. Do not be a miser. Then he took me by the hand and squeezed it very affectionately. And he said, "Promise me on my deathbed that you will write and publish this book." No, he completely stole my heart by his gracious, divine company over these 8 weeks. I promised. And I wrote it. It's about a boy born in Chicago, brought up in a northern suburb, small town. It was a pretty normal kind of childhood. But then something happened. I became a teenager in the 1960s. And it was a turbulent time. When I was 15 years old, I had a job. And except for myself and one friend, everyone else was African Americans from the south side of Chicago. They were all my father's age. They were so beaten down by poverty, and they didn't have a chance. And I love them, and they love me. Why? Why do I get to live, a nice life, and they don't? Because of color. It just seemed like such a contradiction. The very basis of the greatness of America is freedom. And the Vietnam War was raging. And in those days, there was a draft. If you get drafted when you're 18, you either go to jail or you go to war. Or you escape the country and be a felon. Serious. I had many questions. I joined the civil rights movement. I expressed my concern about the war. I joined the counterculture. When I was 19, my friend Gary asked, "Come with me to Europe for a summer vacation." I said, "I have no money." He said, "I don't either. But Frank's going to pay for both of us." Frank was from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So I said, "He's going to pay for both of us? Okay, I'll go." So we got a flight to Iceland. And because there were no volcanoes at that time, we got to go on a connecting flight to Luxembourg. And I remember the first day Frank got robbed. He didn't have all that money. not that much money, because the first night we were in Luxembourg, we all three crammed into this tiny little tent. That was what he could afford to pay. But then he got robbed, so we didn't even have a tent anymore. So he went back, and Gary and I, we were searching. And more I was coming to the conclusion that the same kind of hypocrisy and shallowness that the counterculture was revolting against was really the same, just in a different package. I really wanted transformation. I heard Martin Luther King speak that if you don't have an ideal that you're willing to die for, you have nothing meaningful to live for. I was craving for that ideal. Mahatma Gandhi spoke. I read his words. Be the change you want to see in the world. Not just talk about it and revolt about it. Be it. And I came to my own conclusion. It was a calling in my heart that that change had to be something spiritual. And it led me eventually to separate from Gary and hitchhike across Europe and across the Middle East. Don't try to do it today. I went through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Took 6 months from London to the border of India. And many wonderful, and when I say wonderful, I mean traumatic, near-death, and beautiful relationships. All kinds of wonderful things happened to me. And I really began to learn that, how we process things. I'll tell one little story, then I'll end this question. What was your question again? How did I get the courage? I can't say that I have much courage, but there was a calling in my heart. And I just felt so deeply inspired to follow that calling. And if we have a divine purpose, courage is given to us even if we have none. It's important that we follow our ideals and our calling in life. Should I give another quote from Michelangelo? He said, "The greater danger is not to have high hopes and not reach them, but to have low hopes and reach them." Does that make sense? It's a greater danger. We should have high hopes. We should have an ideal we're willing to live and die for. And we should strive for that. And when it has a spiritual purpose behind it, then the courage and the empowerment comes beyond ourselves. I was always a scared little guy. When I was a little boy, if there was a spider in my bedroom, I would run and cry for my mother to remove it because I was afraid to be in the same room with a spider. And my mother used to always say, "He's so scared." And I remember one time, my name was Richard. And one time, when my parents introduced me to a rabbi, they said my name was Richard, and he said, "Oh, Richard the Lion-Hearted?" And my mother said, "Not at all." So I wasn't courageous. So many things I wanted to do, I was afraid to do. But if I wanted something strong enough, the courage came. And I remember when I was living in the Himalayas, I was living in one cave. You'll get to this in the book. And it was just a little cave. You want to hear this story? Okay. And it was just a little cave, and I didn't have a sleeping bag. There was no beds in caves. There's no doors. I was just sleeping on a stone, dirt-covered cave floor. And it was night, and I was laying down, and I was going to go to sleep. And then crawling about 4 inches from my face was the biggest, hairiest, scariest spider I ever saw in my life. And he was like lifting his legs like this. Crawling. And he was just about here like this. And there was a little hole about this deep that he was going to go into, this far from my face. And it just brought back the memories of me running to my mother, telling her to remove. And the spiders that I was afraid of when I was a little boy, they were about this big. And this one was about this big. And I was kind of looking at him, because I had a little candle burning. I was looking at him, and I saw his jaws going. I was thinking, God, he could really bite if he wants to. And maybe he's poison, I don't know. And I remember thinking, should I leave the cave and find another one? Should I kill it? Pick up a rock and smash it to death? Or maybe this is God's way of helping me to overcome that fear of spiders. It was a crash course. Now, how to do it? It really works, a change of perception. It's not just theoretical. I prayed, help me grow through this experience. And I realized he's a spirit soul just like I am. I'm looking for happiness in this cave, and he's looking for happiness in this cave too. What makes me better than a spider? He's my roommate. And so I just decided, the candle's going to go out, and I put the candle out, and I just went to sleep with the spider sleeping this far away from my face. And I didn't fall asleep immediately. But I was meditating. The fear was there. But because I took shelter of a higher purpose, that fear actually catapulted my consciousness into something higher than it would have ever been if it wasn't there. So again, what Dean Elmore was telling us, that stressful conditions can be like a launching pad to bring us higher if we just process it with the right attitude. If we're looking for something higher, we'll find it. But we can't give up. That's failure. What Thomas Edison, he was asked, don't you get discouraged when your experiments fail? He said, they're not. He said, 1,000 experiments fail. I don't consider them failure. I have learned one extra way of how it doesn't work. That means I'm that much closer to discovering how much it works.